The first whisper came from a smuggler's channel, buried in the static of deep space. At first, nobody believed it. Just another rumor floating among traders who'd drink away their profits and trade ghost stories of alien cruelty. But when the second and third report arrived, when images surfaced of small cages stacked in metallic rows and the unmistakable cries of human children echoed in the background, that was when Earth changed. It wasn't an accident. The alien coalition, those cold-blooded things that ruled half the Orion Arm, had raided a colony on the edges of settled space. They didn't bother with resources, didn't bother with technology. No, they took the kids. Boys and girls barely old enough to speak, crammed like livestock into holding cells. For weeks, officials tried to reason. Diplomats pleaded. Some politicians even suggested understanding cultural differences, as if there was some excuse for chaining up children. But for men like Captain Rylan Kane, a veteran of wars nobody wanted to remember, there was no debate. You touch one child, you declare war. The first recording that leaked still haunted him. A little boy, maybe 7, clutching the bars and whispering for his father. The aliens in the background, tall insectoid creatures with their strange, clicking voices, laughed. To them, humans were no more than vermin, curiosities to be studied or sold. That night, Kane smashed a glass bottle against the wall of the station bar and swore out loud for everyone to hear. Do they even realize what they've done? The room went silent. Not because the words were shocking, but because every man there knew the truth of it. Aliens had signed their own death warrant. The next weeks moved in a blur. Old veterans came out of hiding. Smugglers offered their ships. Miners turned over explosives. Fathers who had buried their own sons, men who had nothing left but anger, all rallied under the same banner. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about blood. Kane's small strike force started with 12 ships, most barely space-worthy. They called themselves nothing official, but whispers spread through the underground channels. The Iron Pack, a name born out of fury, men who wouldn't stop until every cage was broken open. The first raid was supposed to be suicide, a convoy carrying human captives toward a research station in the Veyron system. Everyone expected them to be outgunned, outnumbered, crushed. But when the alien destroyer sent its first broadcast, mocking, clicking laughter about precious spawn, Kane didn't answer. He rammed his gunship straight into their shields and fired point-blank into the command bridge. The galaxy learned something that day. You don't cage human children. Not unless you want Earth's fury unleashed. News traveled fast. In taverns and mining camps, in colonies and forgotten slums, men repeated the same story. Captain Kane and his crew had burned an alien destroyer to ash because their children were on board. By the time the second battle came, their 12 ships had turned into 30. By the third, over 100. The aliens didn't understand. To them, humans were a new species still testing the edges of space. Fragile, primitive. But they didn't understand what made men dangerous. They didn't understand that a father's grief could fuel a war machine stronger than any empire. One night, Kane stood in the war room of a stolen alien freighter, staring at a star map lit with red enemy systems. Around him, the others argued how to strike, how to move, how to avoid annihilation. But Kane wasn't listening. He could still hear that boy's whisper, begging through static for his father. That sound would never leave him, and he swore he'd make the entire galaxy hear it too. So he slammed his fist on the table and spoke in a low, steady voice that cut through the noise. They caged our children. Every star they own, every world they crawl on, will burn until those cages are empty. That's not strategy. That's survival. No one argued after that. The uprising had begun. Under the cold glow of the Veyron system's twin suns, Kane's fleet drifted like predators waiting to strike. The ragtag armada had grown since their first raid. 35 ships now, patched together from smugglers, miners, even a handful of military deserters who had seen the same images of caged children and abandoned their posts in disgust. The target was bold. Some said suicidal. The aliens called it Veyron 9, a barren world with no atmosphere worth breathing. Yet it held something far worse than an outpost. It was a prison world. A holding pen for thousands of captives, human children among them, guarded by orbital cannons and destroyers that could cut through their fleet in minutes. But Kane wasn't the kind of man who cared about odds. He stood on the deck of his flagship, the Iron Fang, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the alien defenses. 3 destroyers, maybe 4, growled Dax, his second in command, a scarred miner who'd traded his drill for a rifle. Shields like we've never seen. If they catch us in open space, we won't last 10 minutes. Kane didn't move. Then we won't fight them in open space. The crew waited. He had that effect on men. When Kane spoke, silence followed, as if his words carried the weight of inevitability. We'll split into 3 wings. The first will draw their attention, make them think we're desperate for a direct assault. While they're busy, the second slips under their defense grid, plants charges on their orbital cannons. Once those are gone, we bring the hammer down. And the kids? Asked Joran, a younger pilot whose voice cracked with emotion. His niece had been taken in the first raids, and the hope of finding her alive was the only thing that kept him steady at the controls. Kane finally turned, his eyes hard, voice like steel. We don't leave without them. Every last one. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Men who had nothing left but rage suddenly had purpose. The battle began with fire. Wing 1 surged forward, engines screaming as they lit up the void with missile trails. Alien destroyers swiveled to meet them, shields flaring as the first barrage slammed home. The enemy answered with searing beams of plasma, ripping holes through the front line. Ships exploded in silence, blossoms of fire that would never reach sound. But Kane's men didn't break. They screamed curses into their comms, diving and weaving, hurling everything they had. It wasn't bravery, it was fury. Fury that didn't care if death was seconds away, only that every second bought meant the children below had a chance. Wing 2 slipped under the chaos, hugging the planet's magnetic field, their hulls straining as they skimmed the surface. The alien cannons loomed above, massive towers of steel and power, firing arcs of plasma into the sky. "Charges set," came the voice of a saboteur, panting through static. Kane watched from the Iron Fang as explosions bloomed across the orbitals. One by one, the cannons flickered, sputtered, then fell silent. The alien fleet reeled in confusion, their precise formation shattering as human fighters cut into them with reckless abandon. "Now," Kane muttered, "bring the hammer." The Iron Fang dove into the heart of the battle. Its cannons roared, ripping into alien shields at point-blank range. The ship trembled, alarms screaming, but Kane stood unflinching on the command deck. Each blast that shook the hull, each flare of enemy fire against their shields, was another heartbeat closer to the cages. "Open the surface assault," Kane barked. Dropships broke away from the fleet, plunging through the atmosphere toward Veyron 9. Inside them, men clutched rifles, explosives, anything they could carry. Their faces were grim, eyes burning. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was vengeance. The prison was a sprawling complex of steel towers and electrified fences stretching across the barren world like a wound. The air was thin, poisonous without filters, but the aliens thrived in it. They hadn't built this place for comfort. They'd built it to break spirits. The first dropship slammed into the dirt outside the compound, doors bursting open as men charged forward. Gunfire cracked, alien guards shrieking as bullets tore through their armor. The humans fought like men possessed, pushing forward even as plasma bolts seared the ground around them. Inside one of the cell blocks, a boy no older than 10 pressed his face against the bars. His eyes widened as he saw shapes moving through the dust. Shapes that weren't alien. Shapes that carried the familiar outline of men. "They're here," he whispered to the girl beside him. "My dad said they'd come. They're here." Kane's boots hit the dirt as he stepped out of the final dropship. He carried a heavy rifle, its weight comforting in his grip. Around him, the battle raged. Gunfire echoing against steel, smoke rising into the thin sky. "Push forward," he roared, his voice carrying above the chaos. "Every cell, every door, break them open." He fired into a charging alien, its chitinous body bursting apart as it collapsed at his feet. Another leapt from the shadows, but Kane swung his rifle like a club, shattering its mandibles with a sickening crack. They stormed through the compound, blowing apart gates and hacking control panels. One by one, the cages opened. Children stumbled out, coughing, crying, their tiny bodies wrapped in filthy rags. Some clung to the legs of their rescuers. Others simply stared in shock, not believing what they saw. Kane dropped to one knee before a group of them, lowering his weapon. His voice softened, just enough for the children to hear. "You're safe now. We've got you." A little girl reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his sleeve. The simple gesture hit him harder than any enemy strike, but there was no time to linger. Sirens wailed across the compound, and the ground shook as reinforcements poured in. Dozens of alien warriors, armored and armed, closing fast. Dax ran up beside him, sweat streaking his soot-covered face. "More coming, Captain. Too many." Kane rose to his full height, eyes blazing. "Then we make a wall. They don't get through. Not while these kids are breathing." They set their lines in the open yard. Children huddled behind overturned crates and wreckage. The aliens swarmed, their guttural cries piercing the air as they charged. The humans fired. Bullets, rockets, plasma stolen from enemy rifles. They threw everything into the oncoming tide. Men fell, some cut down in the first wave, but they held the line. They held because they had no other choice. Kane fought at the front, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, his voice a roar of fury. Every alien that fell was another step toward redemption, another piece of vengeance for the caged. At one point, a massive alien broke through. Towering over the men, its claws dripping with venom, it lunged straight toward the children. Kane didn't hesitate. He dropped his rifle, drew his combat blade, and met the beast head-on. The struggle was brutal. Claws slashed across his armor, teeth snapping inches from his face. Kane drove the blade upward with both hands, burying it deep into the creature's throat. Black ichor sprayed across his visor as the alien collapsed, choking out a dying hiss. He staggered back, chest heaving, but the children were still safe. That was all that mattered. Hours passed in fire and blood. By the time the last alien body hit the dirt, the prison was in ruins. Smoke rose into the poisoned sky, and the compound was littered with shattered cages and broken chains. Kane stood among it all, his armor scarred, his body trembling from exhaustion. Around him, men gathered the children, carrying them on their shoulders, wrapping them in blankets, whispering reassurances. Some wept openly, tears cutting lines through soot-stained faces. They had done it. Against all odds, they had torn the heart out of the alien machine and pulled their children free. But Kane didn't smile. He looked at the burning horizon, at the wreckage of ships still smoldering in orbit above. He knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning, because somewhere out there, in the vast black, more cages waited. More children, more cries in the dark, and he swore as long as he had breath in his lungs, no human child would ever rot in a cage again. The galaxy noticed. Not in whispers this time, not in smugglers' taverns or encrypted back channels, but in headlines that screamed across star systems. Human strike force levels alien prison world. Thousands of children freed in unprecedented uprising. Alien destroyers annihilated by primitive fleet. To the alien coalition, it was blasphemy. To the colonies scattered across human space, it was revelation. For the first time in living memory, mankind had struck back, and not just with words or pitiful diplomacy. They had bared their teeth and drawn blood. But the consequences came like storm clouds. In the great hall of the Veyron Dominion, alien warlords gathered in a circle of cold steel and dim light. Their bodies twitched with agitation, claws scraping, mandibles clicking, eyes glowing with a hate that burned deeper than any sun. "The humans must be eradicated," hissed one, its voice echoing in guttural tones. "They are vermin, and now they dare to bite." Another, taller and draped in ceremonial armor, slammed its clawed hand on the table. "They desecrated a prison world. They slaughtered our guardians. They freed the spawn. Children. They will pay with their entire species." A third spoke quieter, its multifaceted eyes narrowed. "Perhaps we underestimated them. Their vessels are crude, but their will, it is unlike others we have conquered." The room grew tense. To admit fear was dangerous, but the truth lingered in the silence. Humans had shown something the aliens hadn't expected. Unyielding fury born not of conquest, but of protection. A species that went to war not for power, but for their young. That, more than anything, unsettled them. The Council's decision was swift. Retaliation. Not a skirmish, not another raid. Extermination. The human colonies on the fringe would burn, and Earth itself would tremble before the Coalition's fleets. Back on the Iron Fang, Kane stood in the war room, surrounded by battered men. Maps and reports littered the table, glowing with red markers where alien fleets had begun to shift. "They're moving fast," said Dax, his voice gravelly. He pointed at one system after another. 3 colonies already hit, no survivors." Joran slammed his fist on the console, his young face twisted in rage. "Then we hit back harder! We've shown we can beat them! Let's keep going!" Kane didn't answer right away. He stared at the star map, his jaw tight. He'd known this was coming. Every raid, every cage torn open, it was fuel on the fire. The aliens wouldn't stop now. They couldn't afford to. "They'll come for Earth," Kane said finally, his voice flat. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Earth wasn't just another colony. It was home. Billions of lives, the cradle of humanity itself. If the aliens reached it, the war would end before it truly began. "They're not ready," murmured Dax. "The governments still argue. The fleets are scattered. Earth's defenses." He trailed off, unwilling to say the word. Weak. Kane leaned on the table, his eyes burning into the star map. "Then we don't wait for them to be ready. We make them ready." "How?" Joran asked. Kane looked up, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had already decided. "We take this war public. No more shadows, no more whispers. The whole of Earth needs to see what we've seen. They need to hear the voices of the children. We drag the truth into the light and force them to act." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Going public meant exposure, meant putting a target on their backs bigger than ever before. But Kane didn't waver. "The aliens declared war the moment they caged our kids," he said. "Now the whole damn galaxy's going to hear us roar." The message came 3 days later. It wasn't broadcast through official channels or polished by diplomats. It was raw, unfiltered, hacked into feeds across human colonies and even into the edges of alien space. A simple video. Grainy, but clear. Captain Rylan Kane stood before the camera, his armor scorched, his face streaked with blood and dirt. Behind him were children, rescued from Veyron 9, wrapped in blankets, clinging to the men who had freed them. "They caged our children," Kane's voice thundered. "They laughed while they starved them. They sold them like animals, and when we came to take them back, they tried to slaughter us all." He leaned closer, his eyes burning into the lens. "This is not politics. This is survival. Every man, every colony, every hand that can hold a weapon, you are needed. This is not Earth's war, not one planet's fight. This is humanity's war, and if we don't stand together now, there will be no tomorrow." The camera panned to the children. A little girl, no older than 8, whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling but clear, "Please, don't let them take us again." The feed cut out. The reaction was like wildfire. On Earth, governments scrambled to control the panic, but it was too late. Ordinary men filled the streets, demanding action. Veterans dug out old uniforms. Miners smuggled explosives to the surface. Smugglers offered their ships. Even those who had once mocked Kane's crusade now found themselves cornered by the undeniable truth. In the colonies, the response was immediate. A wave of volunteers poured into recruitment posts, outnumbering the weapons available. Old freighters were refitted into warships, and for the first time in history, humanity began to act as one. But the aliens were not idle. Scouts reported massive fleets mobilizing on the edge of human space. Dozens of destroyers, carriers, troop ships, an armada the likes of which mankind had never faced. Their objective was clear: annihilation. Kane knew time was short. The Iron Fang drifted above a desolate moon, its hangars alive with chaos. Men trained in the bays, children were tended to by medics, and engineers worked around the clock patching holes in ships that should have been scrap. Dax approached him, wiping grease from his hands. "We're growing, Captain. Too fast. We've got farmers trying to fly fighters, smugglers who barely know one end of a rifle from the other. If the aliens hit us now—" "They will," Kane cut in. His eyes were cold, his voice steady. "That's why we bleed now, not later. Get them ready. We don't have the luxury of training camps. Every man learns in the field." Dax frowned. "You're going to get them killed." Kane met his gaze without flinching. "They're already dead if they do nothing. At least this way they have a chance." That night, Kane walked the corridors of the Iron Fang. He passed rooms where children slept fitfully, still haunted by nightmares of cages. He passed men whispering prayers before battle, clenching their rifles like lifelines. He paused outside the medbay, watching through the glass as a boy sat on a cot, staring blankly at the wall. The boy's wrists were scarred from shackles, his eyes hollow. Kane stepped inside. "What's your name, son?" The boy didn't answer at first. Finally, he whispered, "Eli." Kane crouched beside him, his voice low. "Eli, do you know why we fight?" The boy looked up, tears glistening. "So they don't take us again?" Kane nodded. "That's right, and I promise you, as long as I draw breath, they never will." For the first time, a flicker of hope sparked in the boy's eyes. The next morning, alarms blared. "Contacts inbound," a voice shouted over comms. "Alien fleet closing fast." Kane strode onto the bridge, his face set like stone. Outside the viewport, the black of space glittered with movement. Dozens of alien ships emerging from warp, their formation tight, their weapons primed. The crew tensed, whispers of fear rippling through the deck. Kane stood tall, his voice carrying like thunder. "Listen to me. Those bastards think they can break us with fear. They think they can cage our children, burn our worlds, and we'll bow." He jabbed a finger toward the enemy fleet. "Show them what it means to fight humans. Show them what it means when fathers, brothers, and sons take up arms. Make them remember us, not as vermin, but as the species that would rather die than surrender. The bridge erupted in cheers, fear turning to fire. As the alien fleet bore down, Kane gave the only order that mattered. Prepare for battle. The void came alive with fire. Alien destroyers slid into formation, their hulls glowing with the cold green of their energy cores. Cruel, sleek ships, sharper than any human design, moved with mechanical precision. Behind them, carriers unfolded like steel blossoms, releasing swarms of fighters that darkened the stars. On the bridge of the Iron Fang, Kane stood at the center, his jaw tight, his hand resting against the railing. Around him, his crew scrambled, shouting numbers, calibrating shields, loading missiles. None of them had faced a fleet this size. Few believed they'd survive. But Kane wasn't here to survive. He was here to make a statement. "Enemy formation tightening," barked Joran from the helm. His voice cracked, but his hands held steady on the controls. "They're pushing us into the kill zone." "Good," Kane growled. "Let them think they've herded us." Dax leaned over the tactical screen, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We're outnumbered 5-1. You've got a miracle in your pocket, Captain. You might want to pull it out now." Kane didn't look at him. He stared at the stars, eyes hard as steel. "We don't need miracles. We need fury." He raised his voice. "Signal the fleet. Break into wolf packs. Hit them in the flanks. Bite hard. Vanish before they can close. Keep moving. Never stop moving." "Yes, sir." Orders rippled through comms, and the ragtag human fleet shifted. Instead of trying to hold formation against superior numbers, the ships splintered. 3 here, 5 there, each pack darting into the swarms like knives. The aliens reeled, their rigid coordination cracking as unpredictable strikes hammered their shields. The void filled with chaos. Kane's wolf pack dove first. The Iron Fang surged forward, guns blazing, tearing through the lead fighter screen. Missiles streaked out from their companions, slamming into the side of a destroyer. The alien ship's shields flared, screamed, then shattered under the barrage. "Target crippled," Joran shouted, exhilaration breaking through his fear. "Not crippled," Kane said coldly. "Dead." He slammed his fist on the console. "All cannons, fire!" The destroyer exploded in a silent blossom of fire, shards of alien metal scattering into the void. A cheer rose across human comms. For the first time, they had destroyed one of the monsters head-on. But the celebration was short-lived. "Captain," Dax yelled. "They've cut off Wolfpack 3. Enemy carriers are unloading everything they've got." On the holoscreen, a cluster of human ships twisted and turned under a hail of plasma fire. One exploded, then another, swallowed in brilliant bursts of light. Kane's gut twisted, but his face stayed stone. "Signal them to hold as long as they can. Every second they fight buys us time." The aliens struck back with brutal precision. Fighters swarmed like hornets, pelting the smaller human vessels. A beam of plasma lanced across the void, slicing a freighter-turned gunship clean in half. Men screamed over the comms before the signal cut. The bridge shook as the Iron Fang absorbed a hit, shields flaring. Sparks showered from the ceiling, and a console burst into flames before crewmen smothered it with fire foam. "They're locking on us, Captain," Joran shouted. "Then get us in close," Kane snapped. "They've got the range, but we've got the teeth. Ram the bastards if you have to." The young pilot didn't hesitate. He yanked the controls, and the Iron Fang barreled forward, weaving through enemy fire until it was nose to nose with another destroyer. "Fire everything!" Kane roared. Torpedoes streaked, guns thundered, and at point-blank range, the aliens' shields shattered like glass. The destroyer erupted in a blinding explosion, the shockwave rattling the Iron Fang to its bones. Kane gritted his teeth, gripping the railing until his knuckles went white. The ship screamed in protest, but it held. "That's 2, he muttered. 2 for every child they caged. Across the fleet, the fight was desperate. Human ships were torn apart one after another, but they dragged alien vessels down with them. Miners strapped explosives to their hulls and rammed carriers head-on. Smugglers feigned retreat, then doubled back to plant torpedoes in engine bays. Even crippled freighters, their hulls venting air, stayed in the fight until their last breath. The aliens, used to breaking enemies with sheer intimidation, faltered. This wasn't orderly resistance. This was chaos, driven by rage, by grief, by something deeper than survival. Kane's comms filled with voices, shouts, curses, screams, prayers. He forced himself to listen to everyone, burning their sacrifice into memory. These weren't soldiers. These were fathers, brothers, sons, and they were dying for something greater than themselves. "Captain," Dax's voice cut through the din. "We're being flanked. 2 destroyers closing on our 6. Joran wrestled with the controls, but the Iron Fang groaned under the pressure. Shields flickered. Hull plating buckled. Kane turned to the gunnery chief. "How many torpedoes left?" 2, sir. "Load them. Target the lead destroyer. But if we miss, we won't." The torpedoes fired, streaking across the void. The first was intercepted, detonating in a flare against alien counterfire. The second slammed home, ripping through the destroyer's belly. The ship convulsed, fire ripping through its core before it broke apart. The second destroyer veered off, caught in the debris. Kane exhaled slowly. One breath at a time. That's how we live. But the tide was turning. For every alien ship they destroyed, humanity lost 2 of their own. The wolf packs were thinning, their voices fading from comms one by one. The field was littered with wreckage, flames flickering across the cold vacuum of space. On the bridge, silence fell as another human vessel exploded in the distance. Joran's hands trembled on the controls, his eyes glistening. "Captain, we can't hold. We're dying out here." Kane's gaze hardened. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're not dying. We're teaching them." "Teaching them what?" Joran whispered. Kane's voice was a growl, low and steady. "That humanity doesn't bow, that if they cage 1 child, we'll burn 1,000 of their worlds. Even if we fall, they'll remember us. They'll fear us. And that fear will spread." The boy swallowed hard, then nodded, his grip tightening on the controls. Then came the break. "Captain!" Dax shouted. "Sensors, look!" The holomap lit up with new signatures. Dozens of them. Human ships, reinforcements, old Earth Navy cruisers, colony warships, even freighters hastily refitted for combat. They tore out of warp in a blaze of defiance, their guns already firing. The comms erupted. "This is Fleet Command. Earth has heard your call. We're with you." Cheers broke out across the bridge, men pounding their consoles, shouting in triumph. For the first time in the battle, hope surged. Kane's lips curved into the faintest of grim smiles. "About damn time." The battlefield shifted. With reinforcements swelling their numbers, humanity surged. Alien formations faltered, their disciplined lines collapsing under the furious assault. Ship after ship was torn apart, their green cores detonating like dying stars. But victory came at a price. Wreckage drifted across the void, silent tombs for brave men who had thrown themselves into the fire. Kane knew every one of their deaths was carved into the soul of this war. As the last alien carrier broke apart, fire blossoming from its ruptured hull, the field fell silent. The humans had held. The Iron Fang drifted amid the debris, her hull scorched, her systems failing. Kane stood on the bridge, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with the same unyielding fire. "Send word," he said softly. "Across every colony, every system. Humanity stood against the coalition, and we didn't break. Let the galaxy know. We're coming." The crew stared at him, some grinning through blood, some weeping openly. Kane turned toward the viewport, watching as alien wreckage burned against the stars. "They thought caging our children would make us weak," he murmured. "Instead, it made us monsters." And in that moment, he knew the war was only beginning. The smoke of battle hadn't even cleared when the politics began. In the days after the Great Stand, wreckage still drifted across the void, twisted steel, shattered hulls, and the silent tombs of men who had thrown themselves into the fire. The surviving fleet limped back to the Sol system, engines sputtering, hulls patched with desperation. They returned not as an organized navy, but as something far more dangerous, a legend. On Earth, the streets erupted. Crowds filled cities from New York to New Delhi, banners of human unity rising where only apathy had stood before. Men who had never thought of war chanted Kane's name, their voices echoing through the night. Fathers swore they'd enlist. Sons swore they'd never let another child vanish. For the first time in centuries, Earth felt alive with one purpose, but in the glass towers of Earth's government, that purpose was met with fear. The Global Security Council convened in a chamber high above Geneva. The delegates gathered in sleek uniforms and sharper words. Screens projected the battle footage, ships ramming alien destroyers, men screaming defiance into comms, and at the center of it all, Captain Rylan Kane, leading from the front, unflinching. "This man," said Chancellor Arendt, her voice dripping with disdain, "is a rogue, a vigilante who has dragged humanity into a war we cannot win." Her words were met with a murmur of agreement from several corners. Others, however, shifted uncomfortably. They had seen the same footage. They had heard the cries of rescued children, and they knew Kane's face had already been etched into the hearts of billions. "Rogue or not," countered Admiral Vayner, one of the few military men still seated among the bureaucrats. Without him, those children would still be in cages. Without him, Earth itself might already be ash. Arendt's eyes narrowed. "And now the aliens will come for us with everything they have. Do you think this Kane will save us then? Or will he martyr us all with his reckless crusade?" The room fell into debate, accusations and fears spiraling. But one truth lingered over them all. Kane had done what they hadn't. He had acted. And the people loved him for it. That made him dangerous. Aboard the Iron Fang, Kane cared little for their debates. He stood in the hangar, watching as children played under the wary eyes of soldiers turned guardians. Their laughter was weak, broken by nightmares, but it was laughter nonetheless. That alone was victory enough for him. Dax approached, carrying a data pad. His face was grim. "The Council's talking about you. Some call you a hero. Others call you a threat. Word is, they want you to bring the fleet under official command." Kane didn't turn. "They want control. They'll get it too. You know how this works. Politicians see a man with too much influence. They clip his wings." Kane's jaw tightened. "I didn't fight for their approval. I fought for those kids. If the Council thinks I'll kneel and wait for them to argue while children rot in cages, they're fools." Dax lowered his voice. "You're walking a fine line, Captain. The people love you, but the Council has the guns, the credits, the infrastructure. You go against them, and you'll have 2 wars on your hands." Kane finally turned, his eyes cold. "Then let them come. I didn't start this to be liked. I started it because no one else had the spine to act." The Council moved fast. A summons was delivered. Formal, polished, dripping with the language of diplomacy, but laced with iron underneath. Kane was to appear before them, to coordinate strategy for the defense of humanity. Dax handed him the message with a look of warning. "They want you under their thumb." Kane read it, his face unreadable. No, they want a leash. He agreed to go anyway, not because he trusted them, but because he knew what refusing would mean. To the council, refusal would be proof of rebellion. To the people, it would make him a martyr too soon. So he boarded a shuttle with a handful of his men, leaving the Iron Fang in orbit, and descended to Geneva. The chamber was sterile, gleaming with polished steel and pristine glass. Kane entered in battered armor, scars of battle still etched into it. Boots echoing on the floor. The contrast was deliberate. He wanted them to see what war looked like up close. The delegates shifted uncomfortably as he approached the central dais. Some glared, others looked away, but every eye carried the weight of fear. "Captain Rylan Kane," Chancellor Arendt began, her voice clipped. "You stand before the Global Security Council, accused of unauthorized military action, reckless endangerment of human colonies, and escalation of hostilities with the Veyron Dominion." Kane stood tall, his face a mask of stone. "And saving thousands of children. Don't forget that part." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Arendt's jaw tightened. "You've inspired chaos, Captain. You've taken men from their posts, stolen ships, and acted without authorization. You've put Earth itself in the crosshairs." Kane's voice rose, steady and sharp. "Earth has been in the crosshairs since the first child was caged. You're only just realizing it now." The room fell silent. The blunt truth cut deeper than any accusation. Admiral Vayner cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Captain Kane, the Council does not deny your victories. But the time for vigilante action is over. Humanity needs unity, not rebellion. We need you to bring your fleet under official command, to act as part of a coordinated defense." Kane's eyes swept the room, reading the fear behind their polished words. He knew what they wanted. They wanted his men, his ships, his legend, but without him at the helm. "My fleet fights because they believe," he said slowly. "They fight because they've seen the cages, the scars, the horror you sit here debating. You think you can control them? Chain them to your desks and protocols? You'll kill the only thing keeping them alive." Arendt slammed her hand on the table. "And what is that, Captain? Your leadership?" Kane's voice dropped to a growl. "Their fury." The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The hearing dragged on for hours. Questions, accusations, veiled threats. Kane answered with the same cold fire. Never bending, never apologizing. By the time it ended, the council was divided. Some saw him as a necessary evil, others as a spark that could ignite rebellion. When he finally left the chamber, Dax was waiting. "How bad?" Kane exhaled, his shoulders heavy. "They want me leashed, but they're too scared to pull the chain all the way." "So what now?" Kane looked out the window at the stars above Earth. "Now we prepare. The aliens won't wait for politics, and neither will I. The Council can waste their breath in debates. We'll be out there, bleeding for humanity, with or without their blessing." But as Kane returned to orbit, whispers spread. Some soldiers cheered his defiance. Others wondered if the Council might turn on him, branding him a renegade. Already, rumors hinted at plans to replace him with a more reliable commander. And in the shadows of alien space, the Dominion prepared its next move. Reports filtered in of entire fleets gathering, not to raid, but to crush. The cages hadn't stopped. More children, more colonies, more families torn apart. The war was only escalating. And Kane knew one truth with brutal certainty. The Council might fear him, but the aliens feared something greater. They feared the day humanity stopped kneeling. The first strike fell on Epsilon Gate. It wasn't a colony in the traditional sense, more of a way station. a trade hub floating in the void between Earth and the frontier. Families lived there, merchants made their fortunes, and children played in artificial parks beneath reinforced domes. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't defended like one either. That made it perfect prey. The alien fleet emerged from warp like knives slipping through flesh. In less than an hour, the station was reduced to silence. No transmissions, no survivors. Only a message broadcast into human space, a sickening image of cages filled with crying children, alien claws rattling the bars in mockery. The Dominion wasn't hiding anymore. They were making a statement. On Earth, the Council convened in panic. "We can't respond recklessly," Chancellor Arendt snapped, her eyes blazing with frustration. "If we overextend, we risk losing our core defenses. Earth itself could fall." Admiral Vayner slammed a fist on the table. "And if we do nothing, the colonies will burn one by one. We can't defend everywhere at once, but we can't sit idle either." The chamber buzzed with fear, arguments spiraling into noise. None of them noticed Kane standing in the corner, arms folded, his face carved from stone. He had been summoned not as a commander, but as an observer, a reminder of the man they couldn't control. Finally, he stepped forward. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "While you argue, they're filling more cages." The room went silent. All eyes turned on him, some filled with loathing, others with guilt. "They hit Epsilon Gate because it was weak," Kane continued, his tone cold and measured. "Next, they'll hit another soft target. They're not just killing us, they're teaching us fear, and every time you hesitate, you prove them right." Arendt's lips curled into a sneer. "And what do you propose, Captain? Another reckless charge with half-trained miners and smugglers? Another suicide mission?" Kane stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. "I propose we fight. Not tomorrow, not after another debate. Now, you sit here in towers, worrying about politics. Out there, men are dying and children are screaming. Tell me, Chancellor, how many cages does it take before you act?" She bristled, but she didn't answer. Hours later, in the dim hangar of the Iron Fang, Kane gathered his men. Word of Epsilon Gate had spread, carried by whispers and smuggled transmissions. The faces before him were grim, eyes shadowed by grief and rage. "They've struck again," Kane said, his voice steady. "Hundreds dead, children taken. The Council will stall, as they always do. They'll count numbers, argue over borders, and while they waste their breath, the Dominion will keep filling cages." He looked each man in the eye, letting the silence burn. "We don't wait. Not for orders, not for approval. We strike back on our terms. We show them there is no corner of space where they can hide from us." The hangar erupted in a roar. The miners, smugglers, deserters, all of them shouted in unison, a tide of fury that rattled the steel walls. They weren't an army in the Council's eyes. They were something more dangerous, men with nothing left to lose. Their target was bold, reckless even by Kane's standards, a Dominion supply convoy bound for the heart of their war effort. Intelligence gathered from smugglers painted a clear picture, hundreds of transports carrying food, weapons, and fuel for the fleets that stalked human space. Hit that, and the Dominion would feel it. Hard. The Iron Fang led the charge. The fleet, now swelling with volunteers from every corner of the colonies, slipped into warp and dropped on the convoy like wolves on a wounded beast. The void lit up in chaos. Human ships tore into the transports, ripping them apart with torpedoes and scavenged guns. Explosions blossomed across the darkness as alien escorts scrambled to respond. Fighters swarmed, plasma streaking through the black, but the humans pressed forward with suicidal determination. Kane's voice thundered across the comms. "No mercy! Every crate we burn is another cage we break. Every ship we sink is another child they'll never steal. The fleet fought like demons. Smugglers who had once run from conflict now rammed alien corvettes head-on. Miners turned their drills into makeshift weapons, carving into enemy hulls. Even crippled ships hurled themselves into the fight, detonating in desperate explosions that dragged alien vessels into the abyss. It was slaughter. And for once, it wasn't humanity on the receiving end. When the battle ended, the convoy was nothing but wreckage. Flames flickered across the void, alien supplies reduced to dust. Humanity had struck a blow, one the Dominion would not ignore. But victory came at a cost. The Iron Fang limped away with half its systems fried, hull scorched, and corridors littered with the wounded. Kane walked through the carnage, stepping over bodies, listening to the groans of men who would never walk again. He didn't flinch. He didn't mourn. He burned every face into memory, fuel for the fire he carried. Dax caught up to him, blood streaking his arm. "Hell of a hit, Captain, but the Dominion won't take this lying down. They'll hit back harder. You know that, right?" Kane's eyes were hard as steel. "Good. Let them come. The more they throw at us, the more the Council will see the truth. They can't hide behind their walls forever." Dax frowned. "And when the Council finally decides you're more dangerous than the Dominion?" Kane didn't hesitate. "Then they'll learn the same lesson the aliens are learning. You don't cage us. You don't chain us. You don't tell us when to fight. We decide that ourselves." Back on Earth, the Council erupted in fury. "This is treason!" Arendt spat, slamming her hands on the table. "Kane has defied every order, jeopardized every negotiation. He will tear this species apart." Admiral Vayner tried to calm the room, but the politicians were in uproar. Some demanded Kane's arrest, others demanded his fleet be seized. Yet none dared speak too loudly outside the chamber. They had seen the broadcasts, heard the voices of miners and smugglers turned warriors, all swearing loyalty not to Earth, not to the Council, but to Kane. The people had chosen their hero, and the Council knew they were losing control. The Dominion didn't wait. 3 weeks after the convoy raid, alien fleets struck 2 more colonies, Hither's Reach and Velen Prime. The attacks were brutal, methodical. Cities burned, populations enslaved, and once again, cages filled with children. The Council's response was predictably timid. They shuffled fleets, issued warnings, and debated defensive strategies. But Kane's men weren't waiting. The Iron Fang launched again, this time without pretense, without excuses. The Council called them renegades, outlaws, criminals. The colonies called them saviors. In the quiet between battles, Kane stood alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. His reflection glared back at him, eyes hollow yet burning with fire. He remembered the boy, Eli, the way his small hand had trembled when he touched Kane's sleeve, the way his voice had cracked when he asked if they'd be safe. That memory was heavier than any weapon. Dax entered quietly, leaning against the railing. "You know, Captain, they're saying your name on Earth like it's a prayer, like you're some kind of savior." Kane didn't look at him. "I'm no savior. Try telling them that." Kane's voice dropped, low and grim. "I'm not here to save them. I'm here to teach them what it means to fight. The moment they start thinking I'm a savior, they'll wait for me to fix everything. And when I'm gone, they'll fall back into chains." Dax studied him for a moment, then smirked bitterly. "So you'd rather be feared than loved?" Kane finally turned, his eyes like fire in the dark. "I'd rather be remembered." By the time the Iron Fang prepared for its next mission, the choice was clear. Kane wasn't fighting with the Council anymore. He was fighting against both them and the Dominion. One sought to cage children, the other sought to cage men. Kane swore neither would succeed. And as the fleet drifted into the dark, preparing to strike again, whispers spread across the colonies. The Iron Pack doesn't wait for orders. The Iron Pack doesn't beg for permission. The Iron Pack fights for humanity, not governments. The Dominion had awakened something they could never cage, and Kane was its heart. The outlaw was born the moment Kane's name left the council chamber as a curse instead of a prayer. For weeks, the politicians in Geneva had argued in polished voices about containment and oversight. But when reports came in of Kane's unsanctioned convoy raid, followed by his retaliatory strikes on Hither's Reach and Velen Prime, the decision crystallized. Captain Rylan Kane, once a hero, was now branded a traitor. The broadcast went out across every human channel. Chancellor Arendt herself delivered it, her sharp voice cutting into every home, every colony. Rylan Kane has acted against humanity's best interests. He has jeopardized negotiations, escalated hostilities, and defied lawful command. Effective immediately, he and his so-called Iron Pack are declared enemies of Earth's government. Any who aid them will share their fate. It was meant to sever his influence, to isolate him. Instead, it did the opposite. On Mars, miners carved Kane's symbol, a jagged wolf's head, into the rock outside their stations. On Titan, smugglers painted his name across their hulls in crude, defiant letters. On Earth itself, protests filled the streets. Banners waving with slogans the council couldn't control. Kane fights for us. Cages will not stand. Men deserted the official fleets in droves, slipping away under cover of night to join the Iron Fang's call. Even families with nothing to give sent what they could. Fuel, supplies, weapons stolen from warehouses. For every curse the council spat, the colonies answered with loyalty. Kane had become something bigger than a captain. He had become a banner. In the Iron Fang's war room, the news crackled through the comms. Chancellor Arendt's clipped voice dripping with venom as she declared him outlaw. Dax smirked bitterly, tossing a data pad onto the table. "Well, Captain, congratulations. You're officially a traitor." The men around the table chuckled darkly. Some spat on the floor in disgust at the council's words. Others muttered curses under their breath. Kane stood at the head of the table, silent. He didn't laugh. He didn't curse. His face was carved in stone. "They finally said it out loud," he muttered. Joran, restless as always, leaned forward. "So what now? We can't keep pretending we're part of their war. They've made it clear. They don't want us." "They don't want to fight," Dax growled. "That's the truth. They'd rather bargain with monsters than dirty their hands." Kane's gaze swept across the room, catching every man's eye. His voice came low, steady, dangerous. "We're not here to be wanted. We're here to make sure every cage is broken. If that makes us traitors in their eyes, so be it. But in the eyes of every man, woman, and child we've saved, we're the only ones who stood up." The room filled with a hum of agreement, grim nods and clenched fists. The colonies didn't wait for permission. Within weeks, delegates from Mars, Titan, and a dozen frontier stations sent envoys to the Iron Fang. They weren't diplomats. They were miners with dust still in their hair, smugglers reeking of fuel, farmers with dirt under their nails. They gathered in the hangar bay, standing before Kane like men before a chieftain. Their words were simple, raw. "You fight for us," said a Martian foreman, his voice thick with grit. "The council doesn't. From this day on, we follow you." One by one, they swore their loyalty. Not to Earth, not to governments or councils, but to Kane. When the last man spoke, the hangar erupted in cheers. Men pounded their rifles against the deck, voices rising in unison. "Kane! Kane! Kane!" For a moment, the steel walls trembled with the sound of it. Dax leaned close, muttering under his breath. "Careful, Captain. Sounds like they're crowning you king." Kane didn't smile. His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "I'm no king. I'm a soldier." But the truth pressed on him like a weight. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become the face of something far larger than himself. The Dominion, of course, saw all of it. Alien intelligence reports painted a clear picture. Humanity was fracturing. One faction under the Council, cautious and weak. Another under Kane, reckless and dangerous. In the war chamber of the Dominion's high command, insectoid voices clicked and hissed. "They'd tear themselves apart," one sneered. "The humans are divided. We must strike now." Another, more cautious, countered. "Strike the Council, and the traitor grows stronger. Strike the traitor, and the Council might rally. Which threat is greater?" The answer hung in the silence. Kane. Not because of his fleet, not because of his weapons, but because he had turned fury into a weapon sharper than steel. The next attack proved it. Kane's fleet had been patrolling the edge of the frontier when the Dominion struck one of the newly loyal colonies, Catharas, a mining outpost on a barren rock. Alien ships descended without warning, their troops pouring into the tunnels, dragging miners out in chains. The Council's fleet didn't move. Orders were to hold position until further analysis. But Kane moved. The Iron Fang and its wolves dropped out of warp above Catharas, like angels of wrath. Engines screaming, guns blazing, they plunged into the Dominion formation with reckless fury. The battle was savage. Alien ships outnumbered them 2-1, but the humans fought like cornered beasts. Kane's voice thundered across comms, guiding every strike, every maneuver. "Keep the lines tight. Don't let them break us. Every second we hold is another cage torn open." The Iron Fang itself rammed an enemy cruiser, guns shredding its hull at point-blank range. Kane stood unflinching on the bridge, eyes burning, as his ship shook with the fury of battle. On the ground, miners fought side by side with Kane's Marines, rifles blazing in the dust-choked tunnels. Chains shattered, cages broke, and once again, children were pulled from the darkness into the light. When the battle ended, the Dominion was driven off, their dead littering the barren rock. But Kane knew it wasn't victory. It was escalation. Every time he struck, the aliens would answer harder. Every child he freed, every cage he broke, it painted a larger target on his back. And still, he couldn't stop. That night, as the fleet regrouped, Kane sat alone in his quarters, the roar of celebration muffled through steel walls. He stared at his hands, scarred and bloodied, and felt the weight of it all pressing down. He had never wanted to be this. He had never wanted to be a symbol, a leader, a legend. He had only wanted justice, but justice had turned into war, and war had turned him into something else entirely. The door hissed open. Dax entered, carrying a bottle of contraband liquor and 2 glasses. He set them down without a word and poured. "You're brooding again," Dax said, sliding a glass across the table. Kane didn't answer at first. Finally he muttered, "They're calling me a leader. Some even whisper the word savior." Dax took a long drink. "And you hate it." "I'm not a savior," Kane growled. "I'm a soldier. Soldiers fight. They bleed. They don't lead revolutions." Dax smirked bitterly. "Tell that to the colonies. To them, you're the only man who stood up when everyone else bowed. You can hate the title all you want, but you can't shake it off. You're theirs now, Kane. Whether you like it or not." Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally, Kane lifted his glass, his voice low. "If I must lead, then I'll lead them into fire. Better that than chains." By the time dawn broke over the fleet, the decision was made. The council had branded Kane an outlaw. The colonies had crowned him their leader. And Kane himself, reluctant though he was, accepted the role thrust upon him. Not as a king, not as a savior, as the hammer that would break every cage the Dominion built. And deep in alien space, the Dominion's warlords sharpened their claws, preparing their largest fleet yet. The reckoning was coming, and Kane would stand at the center of it, whether as humanity's outlaw or its only hope. The storm Kane had been waiting for finally broke. It began with scouts, fragments of intercepted alien transmissions, whispers from smugglers who had slipped too close to Dominion territory. All of it painted the same picture. The largest fleet humanity had ever faced was moving, a tide of steel and fire sweeping toward the heart of human space. Not a raid, not a strike, an extermination. Billions of lives, every colony, every ship, every man and child who called humanity home. The Dominion meant to erase them all. Kane stood in the war room of the Iron Fang, the flicker of the holographic star map casting sharp shadows across his scarred face. Red markers spread like a disease across the void, closing in on Earth. Around him, his officers argued. "We can't meet them head-on," Joran said, his young face pale. "They'll crush us. We'll be throwing bodies into a firestorm." Dak slammed his fist on the table, sparks of rage flashing in his eyes. "So what, boy? You want us to run? Hide? Let them burn our people alive while we wait for the council to write another speech?" Joran swallowed hard, but he didn't answer. Kane raised a hand, silencing them both. His voice was steady, calm, but beneath it ran a current of fire. "They're coming for everything we are. If we fall back, there will be nothing left to save. This isn't about odds. This isn't about survival. This is about making them bleed so badly they'll never forget who we are." He leaned over the table, his eyes sweeping across every man in the room. "We fight, not for Earth, not for the Council, for the children, for every soul they thought they could cage. We make our stand here, and we make it loud enough the galaxy hears it." Silence followed, heavy and electric. Then, one by one, the men nodded. Not because they believed they'd win, but because Kane's words had burned the word defeat out of their vocabulary. The fleet assembled above Titan, an armada of outlaws, miners, smugglers, deserters, and farmers-turned-warriors. Ships patched with scrap metal. Guns welded onto freighters, fighters built from parts stolen off assembly lines. It was no navy. It was humanity. Broadcasts spread across every colony, every settlement, every corner of Earth. Kane stood before the camera, armored and unyielding, his voice carrying into billions of homes. "The Dominion is coming with fire and chains. They think we'll kneel. They think we'll break. But hear me now. We are not their cattle. We are not their property. We are humanity. And today we fight not as soldiers, but as fathers, brothers, and sons. Every man who falls will take 10 of them with him. Every ship that burns will carve its name into their nightmares. They wanted war. Now we'll give them hell." The message ended, and across the stars, men sharpened their knives, kissed their children goodbye, and swore they would never bow. The Dominion came like a storm of black steel. Their fleet blotted out the stars, carriers spilling swarms of fighters, destroyers cutting the void with green lances of plasma. At their center loomed a behemoth, a dreadnought the size of a city, bristling with guns powerful enough to tear apart continents. On the Iron Fang, alarms blared. Kane stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing, eyes locked on the Leviathan ahead. "This is it," he murmured. "Their hammer, our anvil." He raised his voice. A roar that cut through the chaos. "All ships, wolf-pack formation. Bite, vanish, bite again. Don't give them a straight fight. Make them choke on us." The fleet howled forward. The first clash was fury made flesh. Human ships darted into alien formations, torpedoes streaking through the dark. Smugglers dropped mines into swarms of fighters, ripping them apart in bursts of flame. Miners piloted their freighters like battering rams, slamming into alien corvettes, detonating in fireballs that dragged enemies down with them. The aliens answered with brutal precision. Plasma beams carved through human hulls, splitting them open like fruit. Entire wings vanished in searing light, their screams echoing through comms before silence claimed them. The void filled with wreckage, a graveyard blooming in real time. Kane's voice was everywhere, calm, commanding, relentless. Hold the line. Hit their flanks. Remember the children. Every word drove men deeper into the fight, even as they bled. Hours dragged like years. The human fleet was breaking, ship after ship torn apart, but they refused to stop. Every man who died screamed Kane's name as his final battle cry. Every wreck that drifted into the void became a monument to defiance, and still the dreadnought loomed, untouched, its guns tearing holes in human lines. Duran's voice cracked over comms. "Captain, we can't keep this up. That thing's tearing us apart." Kane's eyes narrowed, his voice low and grim. "Then we take its heart." Dax stared at him, realization dawning. "You're not serious." "I am," Kane growled. "We break the beast, or it breaks us." The plan was madness. The Iron Fang would dive straight into the dreadnought's maw, past its guns, into the belly of the monster itself. No human ship had ever come close enough to touch one. Most never lived long enough to try. But Kane wasn't most men. "Helm," he barked. "Plot us a course straight through their fire." Duran hesitated, sweat pouring down his face. "That's suicide," Kane's voice thundered. "It's victory, and with that, the Iron Fang dove." The void lit up as the dreadnought's guns unleashed hell. Plasma beams tore past, close enough to scorch the hull. Fighters swarmed, hammering at their shields. The ship screamed, alarms howling, systems failing. Men clung to their stations, faces pale, knuckles white, but none broke. Not while Kane stood unflinching at the helm, his voice a roar over the chaos. "Forward, don't stop, bite deep." They broke through the swarm, diving into the shadow of the dreadnought. Its guns struggled to angle down, too massive to track something so small. "Target its underbelly," Kane snapped. "Fire everything we've got." Torpedoes and plasma ripped into the dreadnought's hull. Explosions flared across its belly, shields flickering, armor buckling. The monster groaned, its colossal frame shuddering under the assault. But it wasn't enough. "Shields holding!" Dax shouted. "We can't crack it!" Kane's eyes burned like fire. "Then we break it from the inside." The decision came in a heartbeat. The Iron Fang would ram. Kane turned to his men, his voice quiet but steady. "We hit it and we keep hitting until we tear its heart out. Some of us won't walk away. But if we don't do this, no one walks away." Silence hung. Then Dax smirked, bitter and proud. "Hell of a way to go, Captain." Duran's hands tightened on the controls. "Just give the word." Kane's eyes swept across the bridge, memorizing every face. Then he nodded. "Do it." The Iron Fang roared forward, engine screaming, hull glowing red from the heat of its drive. Alarms blared, metal groaned, but nothing slowed her. The dreadnought loomed, its belly torn and sparking, its guns firing wildly. Too slow, too late. The Iron Fang slammed into its hull like a spear, tearing through armor, ripping into the beast's insides. Explosions blossomed, fire ripping through corridors, alien bodies thrown into the void. On the bridge, men shouted, prayed, laughed through tears as the ship shook itself apart. Kane stood tall, unflinching, his voice a final roar. "For humanity!" The dreadnought convulsed. Its core ruptured, a sun exploding in the dark. The shockwave tore across the battlefield, shredding ships, scattering fighters, silencing the void in blinding light. When the fire faded, the dreadnought was gone. And so was the Iron Fang. The battle ended with silence. The Dominion, stunned by the loss of their Leviathan, retreated in chaos. Humanity's battered fleet, crippled and bleeding, drifted among the wreckage. Thousands were dead, but billions lived. And in every surviving ship, in every broken colony, one name was whispered like a prayer and a curse. Cain, the outlaw who became a banner, the soldier who became a legend. The man who taught the galaxy one truth carved in blood and fire. You don't cage humanity's children.